Welcome, dear listener. Before our story begins, I invite you to let go. Let go of the noise, the rushing thoughts, the weight you've been carrying all day. Let them drift away, like leaves on a quiet stream. Feel your body soften. Let the bed hold you gently, fully like a cloud that knows you by name. Let your breath settle now. Inhale gently, exhale slowly. There is nowhere else you need to be. You're here now, safe, calm, breathing easy. Let every part of you relax, just a little more. Our story tonight begins far above the world, where time is measured not by clocks, but by candlelight, the ring of a single silver bell. Our story begins at the edge of twilight. Golden sunlight spills across the stone towers of a great medieval castle. Far above the kitchens, the echoing banquet halls, and the sentries pacing the outer walls. There is a turret nestled in the clouds. Sometimes ravens rest on the window ledges. Sometimes mist curls gently through the open shutters. Inside that turret lies the royal scriptorium. This is no ordinary library. There are no loud voices here, no footsteps that rush or echo. Only the hush of ink flowing, the hush of ancient parchment turning, and the hush of thought, deep and peaceful, like a still pond beneath the moonlight. Each evening, as the sun begins to fall, scribes in soft woolen robes gather to copy scrolls and write the king's records. Their hands are steady, their minds calm. In the center of the round room hangs a bell, small, simple, silver, the king's library bell. When it chimes, all conversation stops, and a sacred hour of silence begins. This is no fantasy, it's a tradition from long ago. In some real royal scriptoria, monks and scribes followed timed silence. Words written by hand were treasures, protected by peace and candlelight. Among these quiet scribes is a boy, no older than 15. His name is Elias. He walks barefoot across the stone floor, carrying a satchel filled with scrolls and ink. His hair is the color of soft ash, and his eyes are a gentle gray, like morning clouds. Like every night, he bows before the bell, then takes his seat near the high-arched window, his favorite place. Outside, the hills glow gold. Inside, the air smells of beeswax, aged paper, and lavender oil rubbed into the desks to keep moths away. Elias spreads out his scroll. He opens his inkwell. He waits. The bell rings. One soft, clear note. The room is still. Quills begin to move. Ink flows. The only sound is the gentle scratch of pen on parchment. Elias dips his quill. Slowly, he begins to copy a poem, one older than the kingdom itself. In the time when dragons wept and stars would fall like rain, a king sat alone with a secret sealed in flame. But tonight, something is different. Outside the tall window, the breeze carries a whisper, so faint it almost feels like memory. Elias pauses. He listens, and the whisper returns. Soft, steady, like a voice from a dream. And so, beneath the flickering candles and the steady hands of 100 scribes, a quiet mystery begins to stir. Let the ink dry. Let the breath slow. Let your thoughts drift gently, like parchment across a midnight sea. The whisper faded, but something in Elias had awakened. He blinked slowly, then returned to his writing. Yet with each letter traced, his mind wandered back to that soft sound, like a sigh drifting through leaves. Was it the wind? A dream or something? Older? The other scribes continued, undisturbed. The room held its rhythm. Quiet scratches of quills, the tiny crackle of melting wax, the shifting weight of robes. But Elias could no longer focus. His eyes strayed again and again to the window. Beyond it, the evening deepened. The last light of the sun dipped behind the hills, leaving the sky dusted with indigo and violet. Candles cast soft halos of gold across the stone walls. Shadows stretched like sleepy cats across the floor. Then, just as Elias reached for more parchment, he noticed it. A parchment on the far edge of his desk, curled slightly, browned at the edges. He didn't remember placing it there, yet something about it called to him. He unrolled it slowly. The ink was faded, like breath on glass. But he could still read the heading, written in an unfamiliar hand. The language of bells. His heartbeat slowed. Something about those words felt important. as if they'd waited years to be read again. He looked over his shoulder. None of the others were watching. All were deep in their own quiet rituals. Elias tilted the parchment toward the candlelight and read, "In times forgotten, when kings ruled by flame and word alone, bells did not merely ring. They spoke. Each sound carried meaning. A single chime could silence a war or summon a dream." He read the lines aloud, in a whisper only he could hear. And as he did, the whisper returned. Clearer now. It wasn't a voice exactly, more like the memory of a voice echoing through walls older than time. It said nothing frightening. In fact, it seemed to hum. Not with words, but with comfort, as though the walls themselves were singing softly to him. And then, for just a moment, the silver bell moved, not by the breeze, not by hand. It simply swayed, ever so gently, as if nodding in agreement. Elias's breath caught, but his body remained calm, wrapped in the hush of the room, the warmth of the candle beside him, the slow, sure beat of his heart. Perhaps the old parchment was right. Perhaps bells had once spoken, and this one was remembering how. He reached out not to ring it, but to feel its smooth, cool surface. It didn't chime, but beneath his fingertips it vibrated. A tiny tremble, like the purr of a sleeping cat. Elias smiled. Outside, the stars began to wake one by one, like the blinking of 1,000 gentle eyes in the heavens. Inside, Elias rolled the parchment gently and tucked it away. He would read more tomorrow. For now, he dipped his quill again, continued his poem. But now, each letter he traced seemed to shimmer slightly, as though the ink itself carried something new, not just words, but wonder. The bell hung still, silent once more. Yet something had changed, and far beneath the library, in the silent roots of the castle itself, something ancient stirred, slow and steady, as if listening once again. Sleep now, in the safety of this chamber of silence. Let the candle burn low, the mystery settle into your dreams. Let the bell's memory ring gently, deep inside your chest. The next evening arrived with a hush, as it always did. But to Elias, everything felt just slightly different, as if the room itself remembered. The tower had the same golden candlelight, the same scent of ink and lavender, the same quiet rustle of robes and soft ticking of the water clock outside the scriptorium door. Yet when he entered, his footsteps felt softer, his hands steadier, and in his satchel, the old parchment weighted rolled carefully and tied with a thin strip of linen. He didn't show it to anyone. It was a secret, or perhaps a message only meant for him. He bowed, as always, before taking his place at the window. He laid out his tools, lined the fresh parchment, waited, and when the silver bell chimed one soft, clear note, the silence washed over the room like warm rain. Elias dipped his quill. But instead of copying the usual court record or royal decree, he began to write something new. Not a poem this time, a question. "What do you remember, little bell?" The moment the words touched the parchment, a breeze stirred the edge of the scroll. Gentle, curious, like a response. He smiled, no one noticed. But something was listening. He kept writing. "Were you ever more than a bell?" Outside. The moon was rising, pale and round. The stars seemed closer tonight. The hills quieter. As if the world leaned in to listen, Elias paused. He reached into his satchel and pulled out the mysterious parchment again, the language of bells. He reread the final lines. "To hear what cannot be heard, you must first become very still. Still as a bell that waits to sing." He folded the parchment back and sat motionless for a long while. Still as a bell, around him the scribes copied and composed. But Elias was deep in another rhythm, one only he could hear. And slowly, something inside him shifted. Not like a noise, more like a noticing. The room had a heartbeat, not a real one, of course, but a rhythm, a pulse, the steady repetition of quills, the faint drip from the water clock, the occasional turning of a page, all moving in harmony, all echoing each other. He closed his eyes for just a moment, and there, in that stillness, he heard the whisper again, not with his ears, with his breath, with his skin. It wasn't words, not exactly, or like a memory inside music. Like a lullaby sung long ago and nearly forgotten, it brought no fear, only quiet warmth. And then, softly, something new. A sound. Asterisk ching ching. Very faint. Not the bell, not metal, something older. Perhaps a chime from far away or deep below, or maybe from within. Elias opened his eyes, but nothing had changed. The bell still hung quiet. The room still glowed. Yet something shimmered behind his thoughts now. An idea. A feeling. Perhaps bells weren't meant only to call us to attention. Perhaps they were meant to awaken something sleeping inside us. A knowing, a remembering. He dipped his quill again and wrote simply, "I am listening." The moment the words landed, a soft warmth flowed across his fingers. The ink shimmered, just for a moment, and faded back into still black. But Elias knew. Something had heard him. Whatever it was, it would answer. Maybe not in words, maybe not tonight, but soon. For now, it was enough to know. The bell was waiting, so was he. Sleep now, in the rhythm of ancient things. Let your thoughts ring gently, like soft echoes in stone. Let your breath move with the silence, and let the bell's waiting song carry you through the night. The morning came with slow clouds and cool air, brushing the stone towers with soft mist. Elias woke earlier than usual, the whisper still echoing gently in his chest. Not loud, not urgent, just present, like a warm ember beneath quiet ash. He washed, dressed, and moved through the castle halls with a kind of floating calm. Every sound, the creak of a wooden door, the trickle of the courtyard fountain, the soft sweep of a servant's broom seemed more musical than usual, as if the whole castle breathed with him. After a small breakfast of warm bread and honey, he climbed the winding stairs toward the scriptorium. But this time he carried something new, a small brass tuning fork tucked carefully into his robe. It had belonged to his grandfather, who once tuned bells in the abbey's bell tower. Elias had never thought much of it before, but now it felt important. He reached the top of the stairs and paused before the arched door. The hallway was silent, a kind of silence that listens back. He stepped inside. The scribes were already seated, murmuring softly before the hour of silence began. He nodded politely, walked to his desk, and gently placed the tuning fork beside his inkwell. Then, very quietly, he tapped it against the stone tabletop. A single note rang out, pure and delicate, higher than the library bell, but steady, vibrating faintly in the air. No one else seemed to notice, but the bell did. It swayed once, lightly, just enough for Elias to see it shimmer, then settled. The tuning fork's tone faded, but the silence it left behind was somehow deeper, richer. Elias felt it settle into his bones like warmth from the sun. When the official bell rang moments later, beginning the scriptorium's hour of silence, Elias was already listening, in a new way, not just with his ears, but with his breath, his fingertips, his heartbeat. He opened a fresh scroll and began to write, not with a goal, but with curiosity. And what flowed onto the parchment surprised even him. The words came as if spoken softly beside him. There is a bell for waking, a bell for morning, a bell for warning, and a bell for remembering. Elias paused, as these weren't his thoughts. Not exactly, but they felt familiar, as though he'd always known them, just never said them aloud. He dipped his quill again. A bell for memory rings only in silence. It speaks not to the ears, but to the stillness within. The candle beside him flickered gently. Outside, the wind shifted. Inside, the bell sang not loudly, not with metal, with memory. Elias looked up. For a second, the room faded. He saw not the library, but the same tower, hundreds of years before. Stone still fresh, wood still fragrant with sap. A girl sat where he now sat, young, wearing a scribe's robe. She held the same tuning fork and smiled. Then the vision melted. Tower returned. The candle, the ink, the bell. Elias sat still, breathing slowly. He knew now the bell didn't belong to him. It belonged to many. It remembered all who had come before, and welcomed all who came with open hearts. He wrote one final line on the scroll. I am part of the memory now, then sat back, watching the words dry into silence. Let your mind rest now. Let the rhythm of writing soothe your breath. Let the gentle hum of bells guide your dreams, as the library remembers you too. Later that evening, Elias sat alone beneath the stars. The scriptorium had already dimmed. The candles were out. The bell was still. But Elias remained on the outer walk of the castle, wrapped in his cloak, looking out at the night sky above the hills. There was something about the quiet outside, so open, so wide. It reminded him of the silence inside the turret. Both were full of messages, if you listened patiently. He reached into his satchel and unfolded the parchment once more. The language of bells. Every time he read it, something new revealed itself. Or perhaps it had always been there, waiting for the right moment. Tonight, it was a note in the margin, small and faded like smoke. Not all bells are struck. Some are heard only when the soul is still. He read the line again, then closed his eyes and listened. There were no voices, no footsteps. Only the soft brush of wind through ivy. The distant sound of a bird calling into the dusk. The steady beat of his own heart. Underneath all of that, a hum. It wasn't a sound in the air, it was something inside him. He remembered the vision of the girl scribe. The tuning fork. It's the soft movement of the bell. The idea came clearly now. The bell was not only a tool, it was a path. Not a sound maker, but a stillness bringer. A guide. He opened his eyes and looked up at the stars. They shimmered gently, as if nodding to the same truth. He smiled, then whispered quietly, not to be heard by anyone nearby, but by the space around him. I hear you. A breeze passed his face, warm and slow, and for a brief moment, the stars above shimmered brighter. The sky itself seemed to ripple, like a pond touched by memory. The next morning, Elias arrived at the scriptorium before the others. The bell was there, resting peacefully above the center of the room. He stood in front of it for a long moment. Then, with deep respect, he knelt, not because of tradition, because something sacred had passed between them. He reached into his satchel and placed the tuning fork beneath the bell, then carefully set the old scroll beside it. He no longer needed to keep it hidden. Its message was already within him. When the scribes arrived, Elias simply nodded and returned to his place at the window. Today, he did not write. He only listened. The candle beside him glowed softly, the scriptorium filled with the usual gentle sounds, quills moving, pages turning. The bell remained still. But something inside it shimmered, touched by the morning light. It did not need to ring. Its voice had already been heard, and Elias understood. Let your breath slow as the bell grows quiet. Let your body rest, soft as parchment warmed by the sun. Let your thoughts fade gently, like ink into candlelight. Tonight, you are held in stillness. It's a kind that speaks not with sound, but with presence. You have heard the bell too, not with ears, but with your heart. And as you sleep, it may hum within you as softly as the stars above. That night, as Elias lay in his small chamber, sleep did not come quickly. Not because he was restless. In fact, he was calm. His body was warm beneath the woolen blanket, and the faint smell of lavender drifted from the herbs tucked above the wooden beam overhead. But his thoughts were still turning, like gentle ripples in a quiet stream. He kept hearing the same phrase from the parchment. Some bells are not struck. They are heard when the soul is still. He repeated it softly in his mind, like a prayer or a song, until it began to blur into rhythm, into breath. Eventually, his eyelids grew heavy, his breathing slowed. And as he drifted into sleep, he dreamed of the tower. But it was not the scriptorium as he had known it. The turret was larger, rounder, made of wood and stone that shimmered slightly in the dream light. The bell was there, but taller, brighter. It glowed faintly from within. Around it stood figures, not faces he knew, but he sensed them clearly. Scribes from other times, readers from other centuries, all standing in quiet attention, eyes closed, as if listening to something only they could feel. He moved closer. The bell rang once. Not loud, not sharp, but deep, the kind of tone you don't hear with your ears, but with your entire chest. It seemed to echo in his spine and settle behind his eyes. As it rang, each figure opened their eyes and nodded at him. They did not speak. They didn't need to. He understood. They had all heard the same thing, the same silence, the same memory. He stepped forward. The bell waited for him. He reached out his hand and placed it gently on the curve of the bell. The metal was warm, and then everything faded into light.
Elias woke slowly as the morning bells in the lower courtyard rang out over the castle.
These bells were familiar, practical, calling bakers to their ovens and guards to their posts. But in his chest, he still felt the dream bell, the one from the Tower of Memory. He dressed and made his way toward the scriptorium once again. The sun had not yet reached the turret windows, and the room was filled with the soft blue of dawn. No one else had arrived. The scroll and tuning fork were where he had left them, but something was different. The bell, silver and small, no longer felt like a mystery. It felt like a companion. He walked to his desk and sat down slowly. The air was perfectly still. He picked up his quill, but did not dip it in ink. Instead, he closed his eyes and listened. For several long minutes, he did nothing at all, just breathed. And somewhere deep within him, that same tone from his dream echoed once more. It was not sound, it was stillness. But it was full, rich, alive. He smiled. When the other scribes began to enter, whispering their good mornings and shuffling parchment, Elias opened his eyes. He dipped his quill. This time he did not write for the king, he wrote for the bell, for the silence, for the memory. And as the candle beside him flickered in the morning hush, he felt something rise gently inside him. A quiet knowing. A peace that would last the rest of the day. Let your thoughts rest now. Let the quiet within you ring clear and steady. Let yourself drift into that sacred stillness. You are safe, you are seen, and the bell remembers you. Over the next few days, Elias fell into a new rhythm. He still followed the routines of the scribes, still bowed to the bell, still dipped his quill and copied royal records with care. But something had changed within him. Each time the bell rang, he heard more than sound. He heard space opening, he heard memory breathing, and he felt as if he were stepping into a place far older than the tower itself. A place built not from stone, but from silence. One morning, after the others had left for their midday meal, Elias remained behind in the scriptorium. He sat beneath the window, watching the light move slowly across the wooden floor. The bell above him swayed slightly, though there was no wind. He stood and walked to the center of the room. He looked up at the bell and asked softly, more from feeling than thought, "What are you holding? What songs do you still keep inside?" There was no voice in reply, but the air shifted. Gently, the silence deepened. Elias placed a hand over his heart. He stood like that for a long time, just breathing. Then he walked to the old scroll and turned it over. On the back, in faded script that hadn't been there before, a new passage had appeared. He read it carefully. When a bell is struck, it remembers the shape of sound. But when it is heard in silence, it remembers the shape of truth. Elias read it again, the shape of truth. He did not fully understand it, not with his mind, but in his chest, the words landed. It fit somewhere. He sat back down and took a new scroll. This time, his hands moved without hesitation. He began to write. Not a record, not a poem, but something between the two. Wrote of bells that had never been cast, of memories held in breath, of echoes that needed no walls. His script curved like wind, his letters fell like ash. And as the candle beside him burned lower, the bell remained still. Yet somehow, its silence grew warmer, as if it were listening too. That night, Elias returned to his bed early. He lay back and stared at the wooden beams above him. He did not feel tired, but he felt still. His breath came slow and even. His body felt light, like it was floating just above the mattress. Dot. And once again he heard the hum, not from outside, but from the space between his breaths. He followed it inward, past the noise of thought, past the shapes of memory, until he reached a room. A round room, like the scriptorium. But this one had no floor, no ceiling, no, just a bell, suspended in golden light. He floated toward it, and the bell sang, one long, low tone. It opened him. It unfolded his fears and tucked them away like folded paper. It soothed the deepest parts of him, the ones that never had words. He drifted there, held by sound, wrapped in memory. When he awoke the next morning, he did not remember the dream clearly. But he awoke with peace in his spine and silence in his lungs, the kind of silence that strengthens, the kind that protects. He rose, dressed, and walked once more to the tower. Let your breath soften now. Let your chest rise and fall like a feather. Let yourself float gently towards sleep. There is a bell within you too. It doesn't need to ring. It only needs to be heard. In the weeks that followed, Elias found himself drawn deeper into the quiet language of the tower. He still performed his duties. He still copied royal edicts and treaties. But each letter he wrote felt infused with something more. Each pause between sentences felt as important as the ink itself. The other scribes began to notice something different about him. They saw how he listened before writing, how he moved with more care, how he seemed to hear things they could not. No one asked questions, but some began sitting a little closer to him, hoping, perhaps, that a bit of his calm might reach them too. One afternoon, during the final hour of light, an older scribe named Master Aldrich approached him. He was a kind man, with eyes that had grown cloudy over the years, and hands that still moved with surprising grace. Aldrich stood beside Elias's desk without speaking, and placed a folded parchment down beside him. "This came for you, Elias." Looked at the parchment. The seal was unfamiliar. A simple spiral stamped in wax. He opened it carefully. Inside was a short passage. "You have begun to remember what others forget. The bell does not call the ear. It calls the soul. When you are ready, come to the lower crypt at moonrise." Alone, there was no signature. Elias read it twice, then folded it and placed it under his satchel. He said nothing. Something in him stirred. That night, after the castle had grown quiet and the kitchens had cooled, Elias made his way to the lower levels. He carried no candle, only the parchment and the memory of the bell. The stairs curled downward, deeper than he had ever gone. He passed doors he had never noticed. Old wood, rusted hinges, walls grown damp with age. Eventually, he reached a narrow corridor lit by a single iron lantern. At the end was an open doorway. He stepped inside. The room was round. The air was still. A faint scent of cedar and earth hung in the space. And in the center, surrounded by a ring of carved stones, stood another bell, much larger than the one above, worn smooth with age. Its surface etched with symbols he did not recognize. He approached slowly. The silence in the room was not empty. It was full, like the pause before a great story begins. He placed a hand on the bell. It was warm. Without knowing why, he closed his eyes and he listened. He listened not with his ears, but with his entire self. A pulse filled the space. Not a sound. A presence, steady rhythm, older than breath. It moved through him, not as a voice, but as a knowing. And in that moment, Elias felt something unlock within him. He was no longer a boy in a castle. He was part of a line, thread woven through centuries. A keeper of silence, a listener of bells. When he opened his eyes, the room had not changed, but he had. He stepped back and bowed to the great bell, then turned and walked slowly up the stairs. Not to return to who he was, but to carry forward what he had heard. Let your body relax now. Let your breath follow the rhythm of something ancient.
Ow.
Let yourself sink into the hush of understanding. We're part of the silence too, and the silence remembers you. The next morning, Elias awoke before the first bell of the day. He sat upright in bed, his hands resting in his lap, eyes open but soft. The dream had not been vivid, yet he carried its weight like a warm cloak around his shoulders. He no longer felt like a visitor in the tower. He felt rooted now, like the great stone walls, like the bell itself. The castle was quiet as he walked its corridors. Even the usual creaks and footsteps seemed hushed, as though the entire building knew something had shifted. When he reached the scriptorium, the light was still dim. Faint glow crept along the floor from the rising sun beyond the hills. He walked to the center of the room where the silver bell hung. It didn't move, but Elias no longer needed it to. He felt its message like a calm breath resting across his shoulders. He bowed as always, then returned to his desk. That morning, the scroll he unrolled was blank. Not from forgetfulness, from choice. He waited. Let his thoughts settle. And then he began to write. Not instructions, not a record, but a memory. A soft retelling of the bell's voice, heard not in sound, but in silence. He described the deep tones felt through the bones, the feeling of being wrapped in stillness, the warmth that lingered long after the hum had faded. Word by word, he shaped something ancient into something new, a quiet offering. When the other scribes arrived, they moved more slowly. There was a calm in the air, a hush they didn't understand, but respected. No one spoke. No one asked what Elias was writing. They didn't need to. Somehow they felt it too. The bell had not rung since the day he placed the scroll and tuning fork at its base, but its presence had deepened. Even the walls seemed to carry a softness now, a memory baked into the stone. That night Elias stood once more at the high window. The moonlight poured in across the desk, cool and pale, bathing the scroll in silver. He looked down at what he had written. The final lines rested like feathers across the parchment. They thought the bell was made of metal, but it was made of memory. And every time it waited in silence, it grew wiser. He folded the scroll with care, then carried it to the base of the bell and placed it beside the others. There was a small stack now, a quiet archive, not of history, but of stillness. He bowed once more, then turned to leave. As he reached the door, he paused. A warm breath passed over his shoulder, not wind, not sound, but recognition. He smiled, then walked into the darkened corridor. The bell remained still behind him, but its presence moved through every stone, every candle wick, every sliver of ink. The entire tower had become a vessel for remembering, and Elias had become its keeper. Let yourself settle now. Let your thoughts grow soft like parchment warmed by moonlight. There is a stillness inside you, older than words, older than bells. It hums with memory, and it waits not to be struck, but to be heard. Let your breath meet that silence. Let your dreams move gently through it. You are part of the memory now. You are part of the hush, and the hush will carry you safely through the night. Years passed in the castle. Seasons turned the hills gold, then white, then green again. Elias remained. He aged gently, as those touched by deeper things often do. His hands grew slower, but steadier. His voice quieter, but fuller. His heart softer, but stronger. The bell above him still hung silently in the scriptorium, but everyone who entered the room felt its weight. New scribes arrived and sensed the quiet reverence. They learned not just how to write, but how to listen. Elias became their guide, not through instruction, but through presence. He taught them to wait before writing, to breathe between thoughts, to see silence not as absence, but as a message of its own. Sometimes he would sit with them without speaking for long moments. And when they asked what they were supposed to hear, he would only smile. You'll know when it reaches you, and over time, they did. One by one, they began writing their own scrolls, not of kings or battles, but of moments, of silence remembered. These scrolls joined Elias's beneath the bell, a growing ring of parchment that told no single story. But together they hummed. One evening, as twilight touched the stones with a golden sigh, Elias sat by the window for what would be his final time, felt no sadness, only gratitude. The candle burned low beside him. The tower held its breath. And he closed his eyes with a soft smile. He did not drift into sleep. He drifted into stillness, the kind that does not end. In the days that followed, the scribes gathered beneath the bell. No words were spoken. They simply listened. And though no one touched it, the bell rang. Once, a sound like memory wrapped in warmth, a tone that passed through skin and soul alike. A message received. From that day forward, the tower became more than a place of writing, became a sanctuary for silence, a resting place for those who knew how to hear what cannot be spoken. And the bell remained, not as a relic, but as a reminder that beneath every sound there is a hush, and within that hush, a voice. Now, let your body feel heavy and warm. Let your limbs soften as if you are wrapped in wool and candlelight. Let your thoughts drift like leaves across still water. You have walked the tower. You have heard the bell. You have remembered the silence. It remembers you. Breathe gently now. Feel the space between each breath. That is where the bell lives. Not in noise, but in knowing. Close your eyes. Let the hush carry you. The story is complete. The bell has rung. And your dreams are waiting just beyond the silence. The seasons changed once more, and with each turn of the year, the castle gathered more stories in its walls. The bell above the scriptorium had not rung aloud since the day Elias passed. Yet those who entered still bowed their heads when they crossed beneath it. No rule demanded it. No scroll ordered it. They simply felt it was right. Among the newer scribes was a young girl named Lira. She was quiet, gentle, and often preferred to write in the early morning, when the tower still held the breath of night. She had heard stories about Elias, the listener, the one who taught the language of bells, not with speech but with silence. She had never met him, but sometimes, when sitting at his old desk, she felt as though he had just stepped away, and would return any moment to look over her shoulder and nod. One morning, she arrived before the others, as usual. She placed her scroll on the desk, lit her candle, and waited. She had begun a personal habit of breathing slowly for 3 counts. Before writing her first word, inhale, hold, exhale. She said nothing aloud. But today something answered. A single note, not loud, not in the air, but inside her. It resonated just as she reached for her quill. She paused, hand hovering, and smiled. The bell had spoken. She dipped the quill and began to write. The words came softly, gently, like a stream running over smooth stones. They were not her own thoughts, but they also weren't foreign. They were familiar in the way dreams feel familiar. She wrote of towers that breathe, of bells that remember, of silence that heals. As her hand moved, her breath stayed slow and steady. She felt warm despite the chill in the morning air. The candle flickered once, then steadied. And somewhere far below the scriptorium floor, the great bell in the crypt hummed. No one heard it with their ears. But every scribe in the tower paused for a breath they didn't plan to take. The kind of pause that says something is passing through. The kind of stillness that deserves space. When the others arrived, they found Lira still writing. They didn't disturb her. Instead, each scribe took their seat with unusual quiet, as if the room itself was guiding them into stillness. The bell did not ring, but its presence held them, like arms around the shoulders, like sunlight on closed eyes. Later that day, as the scribes took their midday break, Lira remained behind. She carried her scroll to the base of the bell and laid it beside the others. She hesitated for a moment, then whispered a soft phrase into the air. Q. Thank you for listening, the room answered with silence. But it was a full silence, not empty, not waiting, complete. She bowed, then returned to her desk. She did not know if she would become a listener as Elias had, but she knew she had heard something real. Once heard, it could not be forgotten. Now, feel your body settle like dust in golden light. Let your breath move gently like soft wind across paper. Let yourself remember the kind of quiet that welcomes you home. The bell waits within you, not for sound, but for stillness. The bell tower became more than just a place of writing. To those who spent time there, it felt like a breathing thing. The way the morning light filtered through its tall windows, sound of slippers brushing softly over stone, the flicker of candle flames that never seemed to disturb the calm. Lira often stayed after the others had gone, her fingers brushing old scrolls, her eyes tracing the ink of hands long gone. She began to recognize Elias's writing without needing a name. There was a rhythm to his lines, a kindness in the curve of each letter. One evening, as she moved a scroll carefully aside, she noticed something tucked beneath the stack, a folded piece of parchment, older than the rest. Its edges were worn and soft, and the ink had faded, but she could still make out the delicate lines. She unfolded it slowly, careful not to tear it. Inside was a drawing. It's not words, but lines and curves. It showed the bell. It's not just the one above, but another, larger, beneath the earth. And between them, a series of soft waves, arched like threads. She traced her finger over the lines and noticed a small note written at the bottom in tiny script. 2 bells. 1 voice. She sat still for a moment, holding the page in her lap. 2 bells, one above, one below. She remembered the legend of the crypt bell, the one said to hum only in the deepest silence. Maybe they weren't separate. Maybe they were partners. Maybe the tower itself was an instrument, a vessel tuned not by hammer or flame, but by attention. The thought settled in her chest like warm tea. She folded the parchment gently and returned it to its place, then turned toward the center of the room. The silver bell above looked unchanged, but it seemed to glow faintly in the dusk light. She stepped toward it, stood beneath it, and closed her eyes. She did not ring it. She did not speak. She only listened. And slowly her breath aligned with something deeper. Not a sound, a rhythm. The kind of rhythm that doesn't push or pull, it just holds. It reminded her of being cradled, of lullabies from a time she couldn't name. She stayed like that until the last candle burned out. When she finally opened her eyes, the room was completely dark. But she didn't feel alone. She felt wrapped in presence, as though 100 quiet voices had surrounded her with care. She made her way carefully down the steps, letting her hands brush the cool stone walls as she descended. The stillness followed her, not as a shadow, but as a friend. Let your body rest now. Let your mind follow the spiral of breath in and out. There are bells within you, bells that do not ring with noise, but ring with memory, with comfort, with knowing. As you drift towards sleep, you may feel them begin to hum, not to wake you, but to welcome you into the hush, where every silence is a story, every breath is a beginning. In the weeks that followed, Lira returned again and again to that parchment sketch. 2 bells, 1 voice. The phrase echoed inside her, not just as a mystery, but as a kind of invitation. She began to wonder how the 2 bells spoke to one another, not with vibration or tone, but with something quieter. Something only felt. One afternoon, she gathered a small leather satchel, filled it with parchment, ink, and a candle stub, and descended the winding staircase that led beneath the scriptorium. No one had stopped her. No rules forbade her from visiting the lower levels. But few scribes ever did. The deeper corridors were not marked with signs. Silence. The kind of silence that wrapped itself around your shoulders and slowed your step. Her footfall softened as the air cooled. She counted each breath. Let her heartbeat settle. Let the quiet unfold. She moved past rusted sconces and arched doors until she found the familiar threshold, a rounded arch of black stone, the entrance to the crypt. She stepped inside. It was darker than she remembered, but not cold. The air felt still, but not empty. In the center stood the great bell, tall and broad, marked with symbols that seemed to shift when looked at too long. It did not hum, it did not glow, but it felt alive. She approached, slow and steady, until she stood just before it, then knelt. Not because she had been taught to, it's because it felt right. She closed her eyes and placed both palms on the ground. She didn't ask questions. She didn't search for signs. She simply offered her stillness and waited. Minutes passed, or maybe more. Time softened in the quiet, then something deep beneath her hands began to pulse. Not a tremor, not a sound, but a feeling. Like a heartbeat beneath stone. She didn't move. She let it pass through her. And in that moment, a memory bloomed behind her eyes, not her own. A memory of the first stone laid in the tower, of builders whispering prayers into the earth. Of a bell forged not by fire, but by promise. She inhaled slowly, then opened her eyes. The bell had not moved, but the air around it shimmered faintly, like light on water. She stood and placed a single parchment at its base. She had not written on it. Not yet, but she would. When the words were ready, when her heart could match the rhythm of the bell, she bowed once, then turned and walked back into the dark corridor, the path behind her gently lit by her candle's soft glow. That night, back in her chamber, she slept deeply. No dreams. No noise, just rest, like a page unrolled across warm stone. Like a bell resting after its long memory. Now feel the hush settle over your thoughts. Let the quiet press softly against your shoulders. You are not alone. You are in the tower. The bells are near. They do not ring for noise. they ring for stillness. And that stillness lives in you. Breathe gently. Let the weight of the day melt into softness. The memory is safe now. You are safe within it. Days turned quietly into weeks. Lyra's steps grew slower, more deliberate. Her ears more sensitive to the pauses between sounds. She no longer rushed to the inkwell or filled the margins with questions. Instead, she listened. She had come to understand that some of the most meaningful messages were never written down at all. They lived between breaths, in the space after a sentence ends and before the next begins, and the bells knew this. One morning, she returned to the crypt with a fresh scroll. The same parchment she had left blank the last time now waited near the base of the great bell, untouched. She sat beside it cross-legged and closed her eyes. The stillness welcomed her like an old friend. She placed the scroll on her lap, unrolled it slowly, and dipped her quill. But this time, she didn't begin with ink. She began with breath. For slow counts in, hold. For slow counts out, hold. When she finally touched quill to parchment, the words came like whispers. They planted silence like a seed and watered it with care. In time, it grew bells. Her hand trembled slightly, but not from fear. From recognition, she wasn't creating something.
Ouch.
She was remembering it. With each word, the scroll began to glow faintly, as though the ink itself had absorbed the hush around her. She wrote about Elias, about his quiet mornings, his listening heart, and the candlelight that always waited by his side. She wrote about the invisible thread that linked him to her, about how silence was passed like a torch, not extinguished, but shared. When she reached the final line, the candle beside her flickered, and the great bell stirred, only a little. A slow shift in the air like a sigh. She looked up. For a moment, the ancient markings along its surface lit with soft gold, then faded again. Lira closed her scroll, held it to her chest, and bowed her head. The bell had read her words, and it had answered. She stood, placed the scroll gently beside the others, and whispered her thanks. Not just to the bell, to the silence, to the stillness that held her, to the line of listeners before her, and to the breath between every heartbeat that reminded her she belonged. Above her in the scriptorium, the silver bell remained still, but its presence deepened, as if the tower had exhaled, as if the air had grown warmer, and every candle flickered in rhythm. That evening, the scribes noticed a softness they couldn't name. They worked slower, more peacefully. Their quills moved like leaves on water, and when they paused, they often smiled, though they weren't sure why. Something in the tower was singing, not out loud, but in silence, and the silence was listening back. Let your breath soften, let your hands grow still. Feel the hush of the bell settle around your shoulders. You are in the quiet now. You are safe in its arms, and your own stillness is part of its voice. Let sleep find you like candlelight. Let it glow and carry you gently. The bell will hold you until morning. The change in the tower wasn't sudden. It was slow, like the shifting of light at dawn. The scribes began to spend more time in silence, not from discipline, but desire. They found comfort in the stillness, a kind of companionship that spoke more than words could manage. Some came early just to sit before the bell and breathe. Others lingered after dusk, letting their thoughts settle into the stones. And Lira, quietly, became their anchor. She didn't lead them. She simply remained still enough for others to steady themselves beside her. One day, a young scribe named Tomas approached her during the morning break. He held a folded parchment, unsure of how to speak. She looked up, patient. I think I heard it. He spoke so softly it was almost a breath. She nodded, encouraging. What did it feel like? He paused. Like being remembered, she smiled. Yes, that's what it feels like. Tomas sat beside her, and they stayed there in silence, two listeners side by side. Later that week, more scribes began placing folded parchments beneath the bell. Some had poetry, some had drawings. Some were blank, offered not for reading, but for feeling. The bell accepted them all. It had no favorites, it only listened. And as the collection grew, so did the sense that something important was happening. Not dramatic, not grand, but deeply, softly real. The kind of truth you don't need to explain. At one dusk, As the sun melted into soft gold beyond the hills, Lira returned to the crypt alone. She carried a small wooden box wrapped in cloth. Inside was a tiny bell, a gift from her grandmother. It had never rung loudly, even in her childhood. It made a gentle sound, more like a breath than a chime. She knelt before the great bell and placed the small one beside it. She didn't ask it to speak. She just wanted it to be near something older than time. To learn the kind of silence that carries more weight than sound. She rested her hand on the ground, breathing slowly, and the air around her thickened with quiet, not heavy, not cold, just full. As though every part of the room was listening with care. She whispered her thanks once more, then stood and turned to leave, letting the hush stay wrapped around her like a second cloak. Above, the tower held its breath, and then released it in the form of quiet peace. The kind that moves unseen but felt by all. That night, the scribes slept deeper than usual. Their dreams calm and golden. No stories, just feelings. Soft awareness of being held. So something vast and gentle had placed a hand on their shoulders and said, "Rest now. You've remembered enough for today. Now let yourself drift. Feel the bed beneath you like the stone floor of the scriptorium. Feel your breath move gently, like a feather across parchment. You don't need to chase sleep. You only need to sit beside it and listen. Let the silence fill you. Let it ring quietly from your chest outward. You are part of the bell now. You're part of the hush. The hush is holding you, even as your eyes close." The wooden box with the tiny bell remained beside the great one for many days. No one disturbed it. It became part of the crypt, like the dust in the corners or the flicker of candlelight on stone. Some said the little bell had begun to hum in the night, not loudly, just enough to remind the great bell that it was not alone. And the great bell listened. It had always listened. But now, its memory deepened. It absorbed the offerings of the scribes, every parchment, every breath, every quiet moment shared in its shadow. The bell became not just a symbol of stillness, but a keeper of it, a vessel for what cannot be written. Lira continued to visit the crypt often. Sometimes she brought fresh scrolls, sometimes she brought only her silence. Each visit became a kind of prayer, not spoken, just offered. One evening, after a long day of scribing, she sat in the crypt with her back against the far wall, facing the bell. Her eyes were heavy, but she did not sleep. Instead, she watched the way the candlelight curled along the metal. The symbols on the surface glimmered faintly, shifting as if alive. She let her breathing slow, let her body melt into the floor. And as she watched, she felt the silence move. Not through the air, but through her chest, a gentle warmth. Like a memory returning, not a vision, but a presence. She heard no voice, but she knew what it meant. You were part of the line. You were part of the remembering. She felt tears rise, though she didn't cry, just breathed. The feeling was too calm for sorrow. It was peace. A peace that stretched backward through the generations. A peace that did not demand anything, just invited her to rest. The candle beside her flickered once, then steadied. She stood slowly and bowed to the bell, then to the small bell beside it, then turned and left the crypt, her steps echoing softly behind her. That night, in the upper chambers, the wind moved gently through the high windows. It didn't howl. It whispered, and the whispers sounded like songs without words. It's the kind of melodies that don't need to be remembered because they never really leave. The scribes slept soundly. Even the castle itself seemed to sigh, as though it too had finally exhaled after holding something dear for too long. Now lie quietly. Let your body feel the weight of safety. Let your thoughts grow soft, like candlelight flickering at the edge of memory. The bell has heard your breath. The silence has accepted your offering. There is nothing more you must do. You are enough in your stillness. You are heard even when you do not speak. And now, the hush wraps around you like a warm shawl. Let sleep arrive without knocking. Let it settle beside you, as it did beside Elias. As it does beside Lira, you are part of the silence now, and the silence remembers you.
In time, the scribes began adding to the old archive more intentionally. Not just scrolls filled with ink, but quiet moments wrapped in parchment. Each one folded with care, tied gently with twine and placed in the growing circle beneath the silver bell. They called them pages of pause, tiny offerings that contained no story, no conclusion, only stillness. Some pages were left blank, some held one word, some were covered in tiny patterns, drawn slowly with soft brushes. Each one was different, but all were welcomed. The tower accepted them like seeds, knowing not all would bloom the same way, and the bell above, though never ringing aloud, felt heavier each week, not with burden, with meaning. Lira began organizing the offerings after hours, not in shelves, but in spirals, winding gently outward from the center of the floor. She believed silence should not be stacked, it should be allowed to breathe. So the parchments were placed like petals, radiating from the bell's base. Visitors to the tower often stopped just inside the door, hushed by the sight. A floor blooming with memory, not loud, but luminous. Even the stone beneath the scrolls seemed too warm, slightly, as if grateful. One morning, as light filtered softly through stained glass, Lira found a single scroll lying on her desk. It wasn't one she had written. The handwriting was careful, but unfamiliar. She opened it slowly. It read, "The hush is growing. I heard it in my dream. The bell isn't finished speaking." There was no name, only a feather pressed gently into the fold. She held it in her hand for a long time, not trying to solve it, just feeling the presence of someone else who had heard what she had heard. That afternoon, she placed the scroll with the others in the very center of the spiral. The feather she tucked behind the small wooden bell in the crypt. Another offering, another whisper. Outside, the season began to change. The leaves near the edge of the forest turned from green to gold. The wind came cooler, arriving earlier in the evening. The candles flickered sooner, and the scribes wrapped themselves in thicker wool, but the hush in the tower remained steady, unmoved by weather, unchanged by time. It lived now not just in the bells, but in the people. Every breath shared in silence was part of the song. Every pause between ink strokes was part of the story, and the bell, once forged in memory, had become a living echo of those who listened. Now settle into the calm. Let your mind spiral gently outward, like the scrolls upon the stone floor. Feel the quiet bloom beneath your thoughts. You are part of this tower, part of its remembering. The bell has heard you. The hush has held you, and in this stillness there is peace. Breathe slowly now. Sink into the softness. Let go of the need to do. There is only this moment, this warmth, this hush, and it belongs to you.
That winter, the snowfall came early. The hills surrounding the castle turned to gentle mounds of white. Each morning the courtyard glistened beneath a blanket of frost and the trees bowed with the weight of soft snow. But inside the tower, warmth held steady, not just from hearth fires, from presence. The kind of warmth that lives in shared silence, in kind eyes, in long moments of breath between words. The scribes wore extra layers, but they never rushed. Even as the wind howled beyond the thick walls, they copied, they sipped warm tea, they paused with reverence. Lira began to light lanterns lower in the crypt, adding a golden glow to the great bell's resting place. She brought a small woven mat and began sitting there longer each evening. Some nights she wrote. Some nights she simply watched the candlelight dance across the bell's metal surface. She often wondered if the bell dreamed, and if it did, what might its dreams hold? Would they echo with forgotten voices? Would they shimmer with soft memories of hands placing scrolls at its base? Would it remember Ilias's breath as he stood before it, or the builder's whispers long before the tower rose? Perhaps she thought the bell did not dream at all. Perhaps it simply listened so deeply that its listening became a dream for others. She smiled at the thought. One night, as she prepared to leave the crypt, she noticed something new. A scroll resting on the floor that hadn't been there before. She hadn't seen anyone enter. She picked it up gently. The parchment was cool and smooth, The writing was careful. A single line, "The hush is older than the bell." Lira held the scroll to her chest, then looked slowly around the room. No movement, just warmth. She placed the scroll gently among the spiral of others and returned upstairs. In the days that followed, the phrase stayed with her. The hush is older than the bell. It made sense in a way she didn't need to explain. The bell was not the beginning. It was an answer, a reply to something more ancient, something woven into breath and sky and stone. The hush had always been there. The bell had only helped people notice it, and now they carried it. In their writing, in their silence, in their stillness. As the snow thickened outside, the scriptorium grew even quieter. Not from cold, but from listening. And every time Lira walked the halls, she could feel the hush following gently behind her, like a familiar friend walking barefoot on old stone. Let yourself rest now. Imagine snow falling in slow motion beyond a tall, round tower. Feel the warmth of soft candlelight against cool stone walls. Let the hush settle over you like a woolen blanket. There is nothing you need to say. No page left to turn tonight. Just stillness. Just breath. You are not waiting for sleep. You are walking toward it, one silent step at a time, and the bell is with you. Always listening, always welcoming, always home.